over 25, 30 founders, and 80% of them had probably very similar lines, like I belong to a Marwadi family and now got into an entrepreneurship. So what is it? Is it like a trend that's upcoming in the generations of the Marwadi family?
Actually, not a trend, to be honest. It is the community. So there are. I do believe there are a few communities in India that, while all the communities are like fearless, but I do believe these 3-4 communities are outrightly blunt about the fact that you have to go out and take risks early on in life.
What was probably the most humbling moment that you faced that kind of made you challenge everything you know about fintech?
So, I mean, I thought it would be a cakewalk for me to kind of start and go ahead.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of a brand new season of Fintech Ki Baat Dil Se podcast, your one-stop destination for everything fintech, from fintech news to demystifying the over-jargonized fintech terminologies. In the first episode of Fintech Ki Baat Season 2, we have with us Shreyans Nahar. Hey Shreyans, thank you so much for being here.
Hey Shreyas, thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure. So Shreyans essentially is building something called Finsire, which is to begin with a very unique name, and it also is probably one of the most unique concepts that we have come across. So without further ado, I would kind of hand it over to you, Shreyans. Just a quick background of yourself and one-liner about the company. Over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Shreyas. We just missed out an N between the two names. That's pretty interesting. I mean, it's a beautiful Saturday here, and time to obviously speak about Finsire, right? Essentially, what we're trying to do, and but prior to speaking about Finsire, essentially gives a good background check as to where founders come from, and how essentially we stumbled upon something like this, right? I do believe most of the founders do have a lot of their past involved and intersecting into what they kind of do today, right? And that's how I think you get very emotionally attached to a certain idea or not, and then get to the company, but a certain thought actually does come from the past, and which is what I think is very similar to our story as well. We do come from a very strong financial sort of understanding. Me especially, because of my granddad being a pawnbroker. I've actually written about it quite a few places, and I do believe that probably been in the description. But the idea is that when my granddad obviously started off his entrepreneurial sort of journey, and when we were a core Orthodox Marwadi family, we understood that credit is something very essential in our businesses. Like, so he was a pawnbroker, and for his post-independence, he started off as a farmer, but then when he wanted to kind of move to Chennai and essentially establish some sort of business, he realized there's no credit, which is why he got into some pawnbroking, secured lending. Much of it, what he did initially was gold, then ventured into a lot to do with, say, B2B BNPLs, what they do today, and VCs, what they do by lending and then taking a share of the business.
Right.
For about 25 years or so, a lot of my learning actually has come from there.
Awesome.
In family, a lot of my family members actually got into the business of credit, and others actually got into other forms of business that revolved or built around credit. Interestingly, well, I grew up business being business and credit business essentially being like a sine wave of at one point of time we'll probably be doing really well, but few instances and incidences actually will be enough to put off the business that you've actually built for the last few years. Of course. There's a risk involved with credit businesses, which when I was actually growing up, I realized that very quickly that I could not join the business because it was at all-time low, which forced me into kind of getting into engineering or doing something by myself. I was very fortunate by this because of the fact that I had to kind of do everything from scratch by myself, despite being from a Marwadi family who actually knew, or a Marwadi family who actually kind of had a lot of business at a given point of time, right? So
I'd like to kind of pause you here. What is it with the Marwadi families and the current generation being an entrepreneur? I think in the last 2 months, I've spoken to over 25, 30 founders, and 80% of them had probably very similar lines. Like, I belong to a Marwadi family and now got into an entrepreneurship. So, what is it? Is it like a trend that's upcoming in the generations of the Marwadi family?
It's actually not a trend, to be honest. It is the community. The
Mm-hmm.
community actually is. So there are. I do believe there are a few communities in India that, while all the communities are like fearless, but I do believe these 3-4 communities are outrightly blunt about the fact that you have to go out and take risks early on in your life. Right? Like
True.
I've seen everyone around me actually, even if they don't make to begin with, right? Like as much as say a supreme high salaried folk would be doing, because I was actually earning really well overseas. I do believe they like kids to take opportunities and chances very early on. The utility, we believe, actually was something that is supremely high over a given period of time, right? I do believe folks like in Marwadis, Gujaratis, Sindhis, Banyas, the psyche of such families is just very intrinsic, right? I was the first one to actually work 9 to 5 in my maternal and paternal, and I'm talking about 100 people, right? Like all my cousins and stuff. And so that blows my mind to think of it, that someone has obviously taken a chance. But I do believe that is you find them even being a trading merchant and still kind of raking up a lot of businesses as SMEs of sorts.
Indeed.
That's a belief system that is there in the community, and it's only kind of goes in generations. Right? Like I have two more younger sisters, and I do believe that every day when during dinner table we obviously do think that, okay, what next do we start for you all? And they're probably just kind of starting their college. So it's a very intrinsic societal
Awesome.
sort of.
I think that's the tradition and the culture that permeates throughout the community, that brings out the entrepreneurs inside people.
Sure.
Yeah, I think awesome. So, just to kind of talk a bit more about Finsire, right? So you said that you were working, and I think you also said that you're probably one of the first in a few generations in your family to kind of do a 9 to 5, and that also I think you're working abroad. So tell us a bit about that journey and kind of what inspired you to come back to India and start Finsire. How did that journey go?
It's a very interesting story. So, when I was working, I did realize, so my first job out of college actually was in risk in Hong Kong. Right? I used to build some models in infrastructure. At that point of time, it was actually very niched out. When I was doing it, my mentor, used to kind of point out the fact that across the globe, there are only about 2,500 odd people who are working on infrastructure risk. It was so boring, so fulfilling, because not many actually. The work essentially meant that to predict when will, say, a Shanghai 101 fall, when will it crack down, when will the Macau tower start breaking down, so on and so forth, which is say 30 years from now, right? It sounds so boring too, but that boring thing actually opened up my thoughts to give in to a fact that I could realize that geez, something like this also could be predicted 30 years or 25 years down the line, right? Like essentially, if you could predict that, you could technically predict a lot more things in life that people tell that you cannot be doing prediction of, or so on. So I realized playing around with data, playing a lot, building machine learning models very early on actually meant that you are the actual true fortune teller, provided you have some sort of historical data, which with some form you could actually kind of tell it out. Obviously with some form of error, but needless to say that you are actually closer than someone who's just telling in the air of sorts, right? I did that for then the next 2 years. I started working in Singapore. It was a Singapore government sort of a funded project, and there also I was in risk. It so happened that this was again supremely different forms of risk models that I used to build. Infrastructure was one of them. 3D printing was one of them. So all different kinds of risk models across various sort of material propensity or material kind of functionalities, and I just enjoyed it. I thought the risk was one of the most beautiful things that exists only because you live in the peril almost of all times, right? It is that you've given an opportunity to say or predict that, okay, tell me what will happen next, and you just have to on it. without any sort of opportunity to fail. Because the idea is that with risk you just come closer to the answers, but you'll never get the answer by itself, right? Coming close to the answer is probably the most important. So 3 years of my life, I think I thought was supremely fantastic, because I could start predicting things that, with just little amount of data, and then kind of build around the data. Which obviously I realized that 30 years of my granddad running a business could not do, and which is why he failed miserably, right? In credit, he could not predict who could repay, who could not repay, so on and so forth, and what are the propensities for him to for the folks to could afford the credit and could not afford it. Right. I thought this was something that was a lot more possible in depth in the industry of finance, which is why I moved to the US. I studied at Columbia. I worked with a few profs there. Steinman Neuenberg was one of the guys who was very closely associated with the Norwegian fund, which is $1 trillion. And I realized that I wanted to kind of work for him a little bit here and there, which I did. Again, built a bit of risk models. Worked at Wall Street for a bit, and then I realized very quickly that I was hooked onto this domain with credit and the whole financial sector of it, right? Like I was so closely interlinked with finance all through my life, because I used to see that I realized this part of it was actually had a huge white space in financial segments, especially in secured lending. The fact that a lot of secured risk models around CMBS, CDOs, or structured finance, they were like just way too much in space. And I realized that at scale, in terms of assets itself, which I was building for, right? I was building for various asset classes. In terms of asset classes, no one in general knows, what asset one holds, how much asset that is out there in the public domain. Is there any sort of a digital infrastructure for it, public infrastructure? And that's when actually blew my mind that everything is so intertwined, everything is like interlocked, and for getting one information out for an individual or a business or a set of users, it takes forever to pull it out there. When I was actually taking data for building these risk models, right? Which is why I realized that this is a huge white space. Eventually, the digital assets would get held by a central repository or in a public infrastructure, and the hard assets, which are a lot more in terms of in the economy, like say, infrastructure, land, gold, vehicle. Eventually, even they will have some form of tokenization around it, and there would be some essence of a public repository or an infrastructure for each and every asset, for each and every individual and business. Indeed. Where you can. As I this is like a huge white space, and it decided to move back to a sort of India at that point of time, and contacted two of my dear friends, Mridul, who I literally grew up with, Subbu, who I've known him for 2 decades, I'm a schoolmate. Mridul and I used to play football, quite a lot we played. That's how we got to know each other 16 years ago. And yeah, Mridul was in this domain as well. He also had just moved back from the UK, and this was a no-brainer because both of them had their entrepreneurial insight within them. And I decided that, we had to kind of do this, which is why we joined together and started Finsire. In short, if you ask me what is Finsire, it's a very interesting sort of a thought, right? Like, it's a technology company that essentially believes that for every asset class out there needs to be some form of public infrastructure or some form of unique identity where we can know that what an asset one individual or a business entity owns. Now, when we do that, we actually pull out the data for that kind of individual. In short, it is the infrastructure for digital assets, right? Like, it is the public infrastructure for digital assets, you can call it.
Got it.
You actually want to make it the public infrastructure. Around that, obviously, various use cases would come in. Lending is a form of it. Data representation is a form of it. Credit is a form of it. But in short, if you just ask me, it is how can I identify your assets in the public domain and give it out to the end kind of, person who needs it.
All right. Awesome. So I think in one line, if you would say it's a public infrastructure company to kind of basically digitize and collateralize assets and kind of link it to various credit products and any other financial use cases as possible. And probably just to reiterate what you said, right? From an inspirations perspective, I think you found a huge white space while working, I think, in the US and Singapore on this specific in this specific domain, and that is what kind of drove you to come back to India and build for it? Or was there any specific thing that pulled you to India? Like, why essentially India? What kind of stopped you making this in US or any other country first?
That's a very good question. Why not any other country? Why only India to be, right? So when we started off, and when I looked at various places, having lived, so one benefit is obviously the fact that I've lived in various countries and I've used various applications, used infrastructure. I think as early on as you are in your life, the beauty is that you have to kind of live around the globe and you have to explore what is there, right? I mean, I got lucky a little bit here and there because I'm 20, I was 25, 26 and I've already lived in about 5 countries, right? And that's actually a plus that more than a minus.
Right.
In country, I used to just use various applications, be supremely deadly curious as to what the hell are they even trying to do? What are they building out here? Right? Now, when I use payments, say in China, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in India, in the US, it was a no-brainer to think that the payment system stack that India's obviously built is at least, say, about 3 to 4 years ahead of what I was using in China from WeChat. Was at least, say, about a couple of years than Payla that is there in Singapore, which is, DBS is backing it. At least was about 4 or 5 years again, which the wallet system was there in Hong Kong from Alipay and WeChat. And at least was good solid 8-9 years ahead of what is there in the US with respect to, say, Apple Pay or Venmo, Zelle, so on and so forth. And it was like crazy, right? Like the whole idea or the ideology of the India stack that was built was in the premise that it should be a public infrastructure, right?
Indeed.
The inspiration from Finsire actually was never to think of, keep it in a private rails or as we build out over a period of time. I mean, something like this has taken up only for the fact that it is a public rail eventually that is built out there. Right. So obviously we do speak to people that, how can we make it a lot more public, and then eventually kind of people can come and build on it. But most of the public initiatives are actually done by the government. It is never and the regulators. It is never done by a private. But the Finsire's thesis has come out to think that, okay, if we build out these sort of repositories for various asset classes, and if there's a way that we could collaborate and give it to the government in any form of sorts, we would be more than happy to do it.
Of course.
And do it also across various other countries. India just seems so much more welcoming for something like this, for an infrastructure a stack like this, only because of the fact that each and everything was obviously interoperable and the ability to kind of and build on this stack, and which is why it is no brainer to start anywhere else, right?
Got it. No, that makes sense. So kind of let's take a step back here into the entrepreneurship journey. I mean, when you came back to India, right, you had a big idea of that you are going to build this public infrastructure kind of a company that will revolutionize the probably collateralized lending space and a lot of other things. But when you came to India and you actually started executing, what was probably the most humbling moment that you faced that kind of made you challenge everything you know about fintech?
Sure. I mean, that's a very interesting thing. So when I came back to India, right, after all the credentials that I've obviously kind of built in all the years, worked really hard for it, I thought it would be a cakewalk for me to kind of start and go ahead. It was anything but that, right? Here's this dude who actually has worked across in about 3 solid countries, worked with the government of Singapore, has worked at Wall Street, graduated from Columbia. And in any retrospect or form, I would believe that, boss, I would come in and I would be invited by almost all these players and VCs would pump in a lot of money and we could kind of, because building infrastructure is actually not cheap, right? Like it is actually super expensive, any sort of infrastructure, right? We start off private, go into public. And that's the story that almost all the kind of folks who I speak to are actually would have told. Right? We start off building this private infrastructure and then convert to public, and we start off with salary as a collateral, because no other kind of entity would give us or no other sort of an asset class would give us an API to begin with, because they used to give only the lenders, that is NBFCs and banks, right? Like mutual funds never. When I started, mutual funds APIs were not given out, or stock APIs were not given out by NSDL to any sort of party players. So we had to start off with salary as an asset class, and to let that out to people was just supremely very hard, because people would never understand that. And so this dude comes in and says, okay, fine, there's a blast. Now people have to kind of, invest, and we go in and so on and so forth. I realized, dude, and that's how the market kind of, crashed us. So I realized, boss, this is like tough time now. I've moved, I've taken a step. I've left my cushion job out there. I should be able to kind of, do it really fine, because I thought, first, second, third month, we would probably do that. And nothing happened. I thought, this is crazy. Is it something wrong with what I'm saying? Is it something wrong with me because I'm overqualified? Or is there something wrong with the market out there? And I realized the fact that it was accumulation of a lot of things, because I do believe there is some essence of where you would find a lot of people come and build this with you, but also depends on a lot of various other factors, right? Like if the environment is ready for something like this, if the the investors are ready for an ideology of something like this, if the team is ready for something. So Mridul and I actually had to pump in a lot of money before we even raised our seed. Realized that we are going to do this forever now, right? Unless we kind of find the alpha of it, we're going to actually continue doing it.
Yeah,
I found that to be supremely challenging. And the only thing that could actually, or only thing kept us going, was the fact that both of us, including Subbu, are supremely persistent at it. Having seen through some amounts of pain early on when I was working overseas early days, I realized this is like something that we're not going to let go. We're going to obviously pump in as much as possible, keep the vehicle going, and then obviously over a period of time build it out as we would like to use it as a user ourselves.
Gotcha. Yep. So how many times was I looking back, like ऐसा कितनी बार लगा कि यार साला चले जाते हैं वापस यूएस, यार नहीं करना ये सब बसर फालतूगिरी ये सब? How many times did you feel that?
I mean, so I didn't feel it if we didn't kind of get the product out or raise for another, say, few months, I would have actually thought of it. But already the product was going live, was doing really well. I was doing well. If we didn't do it for some more time, I actually would have thought that. Not because of the fact that, I don't believe or something like this, but it's just for the fact that we were already kind of, paying out nearly 10 to 11 salaries without taking a salary ourselves. It did mean that there is some amount of burn that we're actually going through.
Of course. And burning from personal money kind of pinches you after a certain time, because there is only so much you can invest and not get in return, right? You also have to survive, and you also have to do some shit.
I mean, so that's a good trade-off. I mean, so only the ones who believe that something would work would actually take
exactly.
Right? So we believed so badly that it would happen, and it would happen in some form or the other. And obviously the whole space that we were operating in, we realized that there's a lot of people who are actually starting to talk about it very soon, right? So we believed that this would happen, and we were just okay with it. We just kept the vehicle running until we realized that, boss, we were now to first one came, second one came, and then we realized this finally had something had to happen through that. Now we have a bunch of companies in the pipeline who are waiting.
No, I think this is probably one of the most common traits that defines an exceptional founder from like the regular Joe, right? The perseverance and the ability to have skin in game and kind of stick to it when things are not actually happening, till the time something clicks, and just the conviction that it'll happen, that kind of separates the badass from the herd, like so as to put it, right?
Yeah, there are only 3 Ps. I've written about it. There are 3 Ps out there that I think is essentially important for any founder who's starting out there and who want and the founder who's just starting, who's waiting for something to click, right? The 3 Ps are basically a founder must already have gone through it or must have this quality, which is your pain, persistent, and patience. I don't think there are other P's that can.
Of course. No, I think that's perfect, and that kind of brings me to my next question. Speaking of pain, right? Like you coming back here with a dream and kind of building, a plan to build all of this, and as you said, right, there was essentially a bit of struggle, a bit of period wherein you kind of had to work through it and talk to a lot of investors, do the market research. How did it essentially affect your mental health, so as to say? Or how did you keep sane? That's
Sure.
a better question.
Oh yeah. It's better for someone to go through a lot of trauma, pain very early on in their life. Having seen through a lot of family business ups and downs, right? I think I've seen enough pain in early days of my life, and I'm fortunate for that. I think I've been very vocal about it. I think there's to see a bit of struggle early on, and then to build that mental capacity or strength is extremely important because
Of course.
see having family around is another kind of big plus. You do believe that they are also rooting for you. I can't kind of think of any other sort of set of people who support founders as much as a family does at even point.
Of course, I think that family support is paramount, without which I don't even think someone can take off if they're building something on their own. Agar family is not supporting you, you probably are already at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean, so the whole ideology that a family would, my family could not support me financially, so I had to kind of do everything from scratch. But the whole ideology that they would obviously kind of tell me do whatever you want, and give a very open space and a free mind to think of it was actually
Of course.
and that's happened very early on. So that is actually, I think the second thing is to pick something which is very important that can keep your mind away from obviously whenever you're building, right?
Right.
And that is that to think of it as like a sportsman. Both Mridul and I are actually we've grown up as athletes. I started playing very early on in my life when I was 10, 11. I represented state in a few games. Essentially, to think of it like a sportsman, to think that entrepreneurship is like a game of football, or to essentially think that you would go in, you would get hit a few times, but you have to goddamn score the goal regardless, right? And that's when you kind of
Indeed. I think that's a great metaphor.
So we do actually think like that. We play a lot of games, and obviously in practice I do kind of do a lot of other sort of fitness that I keep myself sane. I think that's pretty important.
Of course. I think that does make a lot of sense, right? Like going on to the final question of this segment, what are the top 3 don'ts that you have learned from your experience that you would kind of want to hand over to the next generation or budding entrepreneurs?
Okay, top 3 don'ts are actually there are a lot of don'ts. Made obviously a lot of mistakes through it. The
Just
first
the top 3.
Sure. I mean the first don't is that don't kind of give up so easily. I think that it is a very hard, harsh, tussle journey. I think it's easier said than done. But whatever we've just discussed is meant to be that. Don't ever kind of break someone's trust. I think trust is where a lot of people kind of believe that okay, I can be in a trust lot more. I think business is built around trust, and trust is almost everything there, right? Like you have to kind of be straightforward, and don't shy away from shooting at all these places. A lot of entrepreneurs actually are supremely shy to talk about what they feel. The good ones actually are the ones who, and I've seen this actually, in fact, as well as other founders that I speak to, the good ones actually speak their mind out there. If you don't speak your mind out there and be very open and frank, I don't think the other person who's kind of not listening to you would even give a damn about it. Right? So I think these 3 are super important.
No, I think that makes complete sense, right? You have to communicate how you feel, because ultimately you're not the only one who's taking loss if you don't say what you feel.
Yeah,
Ultimately, the company or the business will suffer if you kind of tend to reel in or fold in.
for sure.
No, perfect. I think that was pretty insightful. That was essentially, I think, a very great conversation about your entrepreneurial journey. Thank you so much for that.